Rob Sateloff, the executive director of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. It's my pleasure to host you on American Dialogues.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
I want to ask you, what went wrong with the Biden's policy in the Middle East?
Actually, I think overall, Biden's Middle East policy has been fairly successful. I would not say, I would not pose the question what went wrong. I think that Joe Biden has done some remarkable achievements on his legacy, and they principally have to do with supporting allies in times of crisis, and developing a robust Arab-Israel practical cooperation that built on the spirit of the Abraham Accords from 4 years ago and injected practical national security content to it, to the effect that we saw on April 13th, Arab states, Israel, and European states under American leadership all acting together to counter an unprecedented Iranian drone and missile attack on Israel. That's really the model that one hopes can be developed over time. Now, yes, of course, the ledger of the Biden administration's Middle East experience over the last 4 years has negative sides to it. The horrible, terrible experience of the Gaza war, a horrible experience of the conflict, which is hopefully coming to an end in Lebanon. But these were not as a result of misdecisions by the Biden administration. They were the result of aggression by Iran's regional proxies, either with the guidance, direction, certainly the support of the Iranian regime. So, as terrible as those episodes were, one doesn't blame, I don't think, the Biden administration for their occurrence. One blames Iran for their occurrence and Iran's regional proxies. So on balance, I think the Biden administration, let's put the whole Afghanistan, which is a bit further afield, the Afghan issue aside. I think on balance, it has much to commend itself for its performance in the last couple of years.
But Rob, some would argue that Biden's soft position toward Iran compared to Trump kind of led to this situation.
So I think that there's enough criticism to go around for all administrations. I mean, when one thinks about it, the Iranians over the last 5 years have attacked 3 American allies and American soldiers themselves. They've attacked the United Arab Emirates, they've attacked Saudi Arabia, and they've attacked Israel. And they've attacked American soldiers in Iraq and Syria. In response, there was no response to the attack on Abqaiq. There was virtually no response to the attack on Abu Dhabi. There was a single episode of response, namely very significant, don't get me wrong, the targeted killing of Qasem Soleimani. And then we had, as I said earlier, under the Biden administration, this sort of collective response to counter the Iranian attack on Israel. I don't think when I look back on the last, going back to 2020, going back to 2016, when I go back to the last 8 years, I don't think that either administration has excelled in either deterring or countering Iran's regional ambitions. I think, to its credit, the one government which has actually done a significant, dealt a significant blow to Iran is what the Israelis have done, especially over the past year. Namely, they have essentially taken Hamas out of the Iran orbit, and they have, given a near knockout blow to Iran's leading regional proxy, Hezbollah.
That's
And just to finish the thought, and they have had, two, quite successful, military operations inside Iran itself, which have taken out Iran's missile defense. So I think, there's a lot to go around in terms of criticizing both the Trump record and the Biden record. I think the Israelis have done for a middle rank power. I think the Israelis have done remarkably impressive damage to Iran's regional ambitions.
So what does Trump return now mean for the Middle East?
It's a very good question, and it could be an extremely positive development. It could be less positive, depending on certain decisions that the administration decides to make. I think that that there are several major unknowns about the direction of Middle East policy under a second Trump administration. The first unknown is, in my view, does Donald Trump, will he reaffirm 15 years of presidential policy whereby presidents of the United States are committed to ensuring that Iran does not get a nuclear bomb? Mm-hmm. This is a foundational, fundamental principle that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance did not affirm during the election campaign. They support the idea that Israel should take action against Iran, but they've said nothing about whether this is an American responsibility. And this is really a core issue, because Iran's sole enemy is not Israel. As I said a moment ago, Iran has attacked 3 American allies in the Middle East in the last 5 years. Iran is out to undermine the American architecture in the Middle East. This is an American challenge. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that President Trump and his administration affirms that it's ultimately an American responsibility to assure that Iran does not achieve a nuclear weapons capability.
Yeah, I saw you in one of your recent articles highlighting, this uncertainty about Trump's approach to Iran and specifically to the nuclear program. So I want to ask you, what makes you concerned about this point? Like, did you see some, signs that the next Trump administration might make this shift?
Well, as I said, at no point during the campaign did they say, we will make sure Iran does not get a nuclear bomb. To the contrary, they have said in public, we don't want conflict with Iran. J.D. Vance and other senior officials have said war with Iran would be terrible. It would be terrible on its own right, because it would bring us to another Middle East war. And there is a part of the Trump MAGA world which views the Iraq experience as the worst possible thing the United States has ever done, getting sucked into a Middle East conflict. And they see any prospect of getting sucked into a Middle East war as anathema. And then there's another part of the MAGA world which sees China as the top global priority, and that anything the United States might do in the Middle East is only a distraction from addressing the larger strategic threat in China. Mm-hmm. So many people in MAGA world fall back to a policy which is, we support Israel. If Israel goes ahead and wants to attack Iran's nuclear program, that's fine by us. But the implication is, don't ask us to do it, because it's either likely to get us a slippery slope to regional war or a distraction from China. But either way, it's a bad idea. And so that's problematic from my perspective, which views Iran's acquisition of a nuclear weapon as very dangerous for American interests. So yes, in my view, this is a very legitimate concern. Now, there are some appointees who have very strong records on this issue, like the incoming Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, very comforting on this issue. But ultimately, the decision is the president's. And I think it is fair to say that we just don't know where Donald Trump stands on this fundamental question.
I will ask you about Rubio, but before that, I'm sure you read the report about Brian Hook leading the transition team in the State Department. So, and he was one of the people executing the maximum pressure policy toward Iran. If Trump returned to this policy, do you think he could do it better this time?
Well, it depends what the objective is. Like, what was the objective of maximum pressure back in the first Trump administration?
I have no idea.
So, maximum pressure was designed to deny Iran the assets to be able to do nasty things. And the idea was, you dry up Iran's, financial resources, and they won't be able to send all this money to bad guys, whether it's Hezbollah or the Houthis or whoever. And indeed, it forced Iran to make some very difficult decisions about where to spend its money. We're in a different situation today. We're in a situation where, by all accounts, Iran has the technical capacity to cross the line into a nuclear weapons capability already. And so the question is, what would the goal of maximum pressure would be? Is it to deny Iran the ability to fund Hezbollah? Well, guess what? Hezbollah is in deep trouble anyway. Is it to deny Iran the ability to invest in its nuclear program? Well, guess what? Iran's nuclear program is way beyond where it was when Trump left office. And, it's not money that stands in the way from them having a nuclear weapon. So maximum pressure is it's a welcome theme, but the question is toward what goal? So if it's to convince Iran that the cost of crossing the nuclear threshold is too high, okay, well, let's think about that. Is this the right tool to do that? Or will we need kinetic efforts to actually stop Iran from crossing that nuclear threshold? Is cutting the financial access going to be adequate? We're not in 2016 anymore. It's not 2018. It's 2024, 2025. The challenge is a bit different. So the old tools may not be the right tools depending on what the objective is.
So the deal-making approach probably won't work.
Well, actually, I would not at all be surprised if the Trump administration wants to do both. Maybe apply significant financial pressure and maybe do a deal with Iran. But it would have to be a deal with Iran, which is significantly better than the JCPOA, given that Trump ripped up the JCPOA.
Yeah.
So it would have to be significantly better than the JCPOA at a point where the Iranians are much, much further along than they were in their nuclear program when they first signed the JCPOA or when Trump ripped it up. So that would be a major diplomatic achievement if they can get it. Personally, I would be delighted if we can get a diplomatic achievement that rolls back Iran's nuclear program to where it was before the JCPOA. That would be a great achievement. Is that the goal? I don't think we really know yet.
Before Trump's, when I interviewed Brian Katulis from the Middle East Institute, and he said that Trump is likely to fly to Iran to sign a deal as he's to bomb it. So I feel like you kind of agree with this description.
So I think there will be enormous reluctance in this administration to get into direct military conflict with Iran.
Hmm.
That I think is pretty clear. Will this administration place a high priority on trying to achieve a diplomatic result? If it can't use the military pressure, then it would have to probably use a mix of Israeli military pressure and American financial pressure to try to set up a situation whereby perhaps there's a diplomatic deal to be done. But we're nowhere near that yet.
So now that Trump has been re-elected, do you think he will build on Abraham Accords and take them even further?
It's important if you're asking me about, where Trump's priorities are likely to go. Let me just, bring us back to President Trump's last year in office, just to remind ourselves what his priorities were at that time. January 2020, many people forget this. January 28th, 2020, I remember because it was my birthday. Donald Trump issued the Donald Trump peace plan for Israelis and Palestinians, a very detailed architecture of peace, sketched out by his son-in-law Jared Kushner, that envisioned the creation of a Palestinian state in about 70% of the West Bank, with Israel retaining about 30% of the West Bank. In the end, this plan was rejected by everyone, by Palestinians because they weren't consulted and it didn't give them enough territory, and by the Israelis because it envisioned a Palestinian state that they weren't excited about, although the Israelis liked the idea of keeping 30%. And so when the plan disappeared, it was put back on the shelf, the Israelis tried to resurrect just that 30% idea. And the Israeli government then also under Benjamin Netanyahu threatened to annex that 30% because Trump had said they could keep it. That was the instigation of the United Arab Emirates offering to the Israelis, if you suspend your efforts at annexation, maybe we can do a peace and normalization deal ourselves. And that was the origin of the Abraham Accords, which the Trump administration, finally brought to fruition over the summer. So it's not as though the Trump administration began with the Abraham Accords. They began with an effort to try to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, did not succeed. The Abraham Accords emerged from that unsuccessful effort. Now, the question you're posing is, will the Trump administration go back to the beginning, trying to resurrect an Israeli-Palestinian agreement, or will it build on this outside-in approach of trying to get Arab states to develop their own relationships with Israel, and with the most logical next Arab state being Saudi Arabia? I suspect that there will be a debate within the administration. I suspect that there will be a debate or discussion between the Israeli government and the Trump administration. I think in the current environment, the chances for an Israeli-Palestinian peace initiative are pretty slim, given the enormous burden of the legacy of what's happening in Gaza, and what will be the unfinished conflict that finds Israelis and Palestinians in a horrible situation there. So I suspect, if anything, the Trump administration will indeed, try to broaden this. But I also suspect that without clarity in Gaza, at least a pathway toward, a new situation in Gaza, it's highly unlikely that an Arab state is going to cross that. An additional Arab state will cross the Rubicon into a new peace and normalization agreement with Israel. So we may be stuck for a while. And this may not at all be the highest priority. for the Trump administration, given that it has other things to do. And this comes back to the global discussion of Ukraine and China and tariffs and all the other things that are in Trump's agenda. So I know, just last sentence, I know that, people like you and I, like to think that the world revolves around the Middle East. Well, guess what? It doesn't necessarily revolve around the Middle East.
So what do you think of the international coalition for the two-state solution that is led by Saudi Arabia now? Do you think this can be incorporated or part of these efforts to bring peace in the Middle East?
So look, it's I respect to a great deal the commitment of countries around the region to support a negotiated two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians. I think ultimately this is a decision that will be made by Israelis and Palestinians. And if anything, one of the sad lessons of the last year is that regrettably there is a significant number of Palestinians who still harbor maximalist objectives that perhaps October 7th gave them the mistaken belief that yes, maybe we can actually take the war to Israel itself. Maybe we can actually continue this conflict and push Israel even further. And to be fair, there are some Israelis who harbor maximalist ideas of their own, that perhaps we can claim the entire territory without Palestinians. As long as Palestinians are going to be so extreme as to try to take the conflict directly to our towns and villages, maybe we can respond with our own extreme views about taking all the territory. And regrettably, we're in a moment when sadly, these extremes still have significant support. So while I welcome and I don't at all dismiss the important value of states such as Saudi Arabia affirming their support for a negotiated solution, sadly, we still have a long way to go among the core parties themselves.
So you've toured the region with Marco Rubio, as I saw in one of your tweets, if I'm not mistaken, and this guy who was appointed as Secretary of State now. How do you think Middle East leaders should approach working with Rubio, and what shapes his view of the region?
Well, look, far be it for me to try to get inside the thinking of any particular American official. I just know the record that Senator Rubio has, which is a very strong record of recognizing Iran's malign intent and Iran's malign activities throughout the region, recognizing Iran as the principal source of instability and insecurity throughout the Middle East, and his willingness to support a wide range of efforts to counter Iran's both nuclear ambitions and regional ambitions. Mm-hmm. I think that regional leaders will find a strong vocal partner in Senator Rubio on that agenda. Senator Rubio has been a strong supporter of Israel's right to defend itself against its adversaries, especially those that attack it without cause, or as Hamas did, and as Hezbollah did, and as Iran has done. And he will be a strong supporter of the coalition, the practical coalition, the de facto coalition of Arabs and Israelis that see Iran as the principal source of regional instability. So, I think that there's quite a lot of, cooperative effort that regional countries can make with Senator Rubio as Secretary of State.
Rob Sateloff, the Executive Director of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much.